Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to welcome on this virtual platform Global Head of Islamic Finance, Standard & Poor's Global Ratings Dubai, UAE, to deliver a special presentation, Global Islamic Capital Market Outlook 2022. Honorable Dr. Mohamad Damak, the virtual stage is yours. Tafadhal.
Thank you very much. Let me start by sharing my screen. And let me know, please, when you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, looking good.
All right, excellent. First of all, I would like to thank again the organizer for inviting us, and it's again a real pleasure to participate in this virtual forum. I will start my presentation by sharing with you our view on the current and the prospective performance of the Islamic finance industry, and then I will spend a bit of time talking about the topics that are likely to be at the forefront of 2022. Now, hopefully, I will not surprise you when I say that the COVID-19 and the drop in oil price represented one of the biggest shocks that the Islamic finance industry had to face over the past many years. And the economies in most core Islamic finance countries went through sharp recession, as you can see from this chart. And this was followed by a recovery in 2021, which will likely continue in 2022, but there are some uncertainties, and chief of which is how the pandemic will evolve and the possibility of the emergence of new variant that could lead to mobility restriction or lockdown. Now, coming to the performance of the Islamic finance industry, as you can see here, the total asset of the industry reached $2.2 trillion. It was up 10.6% in 2020 versus 17.3% in 2019, when the growth was supported by the strong issuance of sukuk at that time. In 2020, we saw a lower growth of sukuk market and in some core Islamic countries' banking system. And given the economic recovery, we think that the industry will continue to expand in 2021 and 2022 by around 10 to 12%. And by the way, for those of you who follow our publication, this year, we have decided to exclude Iran from the calculation due to the extreme volatility in its currency, and hence the number, the 2.2 trillion, looks a bit different from our previous publication. If you add Iran, the total assets of the industry, depending on which exchange rate you choose, would be between 2.8 to 3.2 trillion dollars. Now, few reasons explain our expectation for 2021 and 2022. The first and foremost is the economic recovery, and because for most of the Islamic finance core countries, the nominal GDP of 2022 is likely to exceed that of 2019. And it's true that the growth rate for some of the countries will still be below historical performance, but definitely compared with 2020, there is a clear recovery in growth, and in 2022, this recovery will be consolidated. Another reason that explains our expectation is that we expect strong financing growth in Saudi Arabia in the country, and given the implementation in Vision 2030, there's been a significant growth of mortgage lending. And from 2022, we expect to see some corporate lending activity as the country continues to implement its Vision 2030. In Qatar, we see some opportunities related to the investments that are being conducted in the countries in preparation for the World Cup. In the UAE, Dubai Expo 2020, which is ongoing now, is creating some dynamic and a more positive sentiment. On the opposite, in Turkey, the growth will be mainly driven by the public sector Islamic banks, and more importantly, it will be slower than what we have observed in 2021, given the fact that in 2020 there was a major stimulus provided by the government that boosted the lending growth. And in Malaysia, we expect the growth to continue. Now, for the Sukuk market, we expect total issuance to be between 140 billion to 155 billion dollars in 2021, compared with 139.8 billion dollars in 2020. And I will explain in a minute the different assumptions that we factored in for the Sukuk market growth. And last but not least, for the fund and the takaful industry, we continue to see the takaful sector expanding by 5 to 10%, while the fund industry might see some growth as we observe investors are actively chasing yields. The main downside risks for the industry include the evolution of the pandemic, the risk related to the central bank policy mistake. For example, if we were to see a steeper and quicker increase in interest rate than what we expect currently, that could have an impact on the global liquidity and could have an impact on the growth of the industry. And also, obviously, more traditional risks such as geopolitical risks and the risks related to the oil price. And here, I'd like to zoom on the performance of the Sukuk market. And again, when you look at the numbers published by S&P, they are a bit different from some numbers published by other sources. We've seen some numbers pointing out to an increase in the volume of issuance, but based on our methodology, we believe that the volume of issuance has dropped by 16% in 2020. And what's more is that when you look at the performance Q3 2021 versus Q3 2020, there was a slight drop in the overall volume of issuance by 2.7%, but there was also an increase in the volume of issuance denominated in foreign currency, thanks to the still supportive market condition. Now, we still expect the market to show some stable performance in 2021, with volume of issuance between 140 and 155 billion dollars. But the market could have done much better. However, some core players were impacted by the adoption of new standards, and I will come back to that in a minute. Here, you can see who is supporting the market performance in 2021, with Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey showing an increase in the volume of issuance in foreign currency. I think in Saudi, the market benefited from the jumbo issuance of Sukuk by Saudi Aramco for $6 billion. Oman is also back to the market with an FX issuance of $1.75 billion. Sukuk after going conventional last year. On the opposite, what we have observed is that the volume of issuance in the UAE was down by almost 60%, and this is mainly due to the adoption of the AOE fee standard 59. Now, why do we expect stable to slightly higher volume in 2021 and 2022? I think few reasons there. Some sovereigns will be tapping the Sukuk market more aggressively. They went conventional in 2020, like Oman, for example. They came back to the Sukuk market in 2021. And it's true that with higher oil price, there's a bigger fiscal space that is created to the GCC countries, but some of the Sukuk issuance will be used to finance the economic transformation programs. Corporate issuers, I think they will probably go back to the market with some moderate issuance. They've been deferring some of the CapEx execution because of the pandemic. Some of it will have to be executed. Some of it started to be executed this year and will continue to be executed next year and will necessitate some refinancing on the market. Maturities, every year there's between 30 to 50 billion dollars of Sukuk that come to maturity and that needs to be refinanced. And last but not least, liquidity in the market remains good as long as the interest rates are low. And this is why when you take all this factor together, we think that overall the volume of issuance will hover between 140 and 155 billion in 2021 and will be stable in 2022. And the main downside risks, beside the risk of a sudden change in the global liquidity picture, could come from standard implementation. Now, a couple of words on Standard 59. This is the standard that governs the trading of debt. after the adoption of the standard, it's applicable to the structures where you have two legs, one murabaha leg with commodity and one leg with real assets like ijara, for example, or wakala with real underlying assets. And after the adoption of this standard, the requirement to maintain a ratio of tangible assets in the real leg versus the assets in the murabaha leg above 51% became an obligation throughout the lifetime of the transaction. In the past, it used to be at the inception and then on a best effort basis, but now it becomes an obligation over the lifetime of the transaction. And also the legal language related to the indemnity was changed. And this created three main problems for the sukuk market and specifically for investors. Number one, investors are now exposed to more residual asset risks through the partial loss event. So far, investors have only been exposed to the total loss event. And here, if one of the assets is destroyed and there's no backup mechanism to cover for this specific scenario, investors can lose. And the transaction can default because of lower than expected performance of the assets. And this is the risk that was created directly by the adoption of Standard 59. The risk of early dissolution also has increased. Here, I mean, Standard 59 has resulted in adding many other conditions that could trigger the early dissolution. For example, if the tangibility ratio is not respected, it could lead to the early dissolution of the sukuk. And the risk there is that if an issuer doesn't have sufficient unencumbered assets to replace the assets that were destroyed or that prepaid or whatever, the transaction might be accelerated, and the 500 million that an issuer had to pay in 5 years becomes due immediately. Some of the issuers might not have $500 million of spare liquidity on the balance sheet. So that's why the risks related to early dissolution increase, and so the risk of liquidity related to the issuers. The final risk is related to the ranking of investors in a liquidation scenario. And the issue here is that in the past, there was an indemnity language that was added to the legal documents to make sure that in case of liquidation of the issuers, investors are at the same level as the other creditors. Because remember, a sukuk is repaid through a purchase undertaking. A purchase undertaking is a purchase of assets. A purchase of assets can be seen as not a financial obligations from a legal standpoint. So if you go before the judge can say the obligation to purchase the assets comes after the financial obligations. Now, this risk has been dealt with through an indemnity language whereby the issuer, if there is any default on any obligation, undertook the obligation to indemnify the investors as an independent and severable entity, so completely independent from the transaction, adding this other layer of financial obligations to restore the ranking of the investors with other financial obligations investors. Now with Standard 59, the scholars are saying this is no longer possible because this created debt on the shoulder of the sponsor of the transaction. And the workout that the lawyers found for that is to have a little bit more complex language and have an indemnity that would be conditional on maintaining the ownership of the assets. But remember, the ownership of the assets should have been theoretically given up at the inception of the transaction. So we start the transaction with this inherent legal contradiction in the legal documentation. Now, what to look for in 2022? The eternal debate on standardization, and again, there's a strong need to have a critical look at the existing standard. And this process has to be inclusive, in our opinion. The risk is that if it doesn't happen, then we could end up with standards that are either difficult to implement or that would change the nature of the industry. And again, if this is the industry, if this is where the industry wants to head, then it's absolutely fine. But let me remind you that if one removes the fixed income nature of the sukuk, then the conventional investors might lose their appetite, or worse, they might ask for higher remuneration for the additional risks that they are undertaking. And more complexity or higher remuneration will make the sukuk a non-competitive instrument in the capital structure of the corporate and or the sovereigns. Remember the example of the Minister of Finance presented with different financing solution, the pure conventional obligation 3%, the plain vanilla sukuk 2.9 to 3%, and the more complex sukuk 5%. I think the choice would be very quick and very easy for that Minister of Finance to go with probably the cheaper and the less cumbersome solution to put in place. The other interesting trend to look for in 2022 is the green and social instrument. I guess here the opportunity is no longer to be demonstrated, but I think we still expect the contribution to remain low overall in 2022 as it was in 2021. And here again, this is purely related to the complexity versus the conventional instrument. The issue here is that slowly people are realizing that in theory, there's a lot of opportunities, but in reality, these are difficult to implement. And the more people realize that, the more Islamic finance might lose its appeal. Remember the story of the compatibility between Islamic finance and infrastructure financing and the theoretical opportunities. I remember that story from a decade ago where Islamic finance was presented as the solution for the infrastructure deficit in places like Africa, for example. 10 years after that, there's nothing happening. And again, here, a critical look at how things are done and a simplification of how things are done could give a boost to the industry. And this is where digitalization can play a role because blockchain could help resolving the issue related to the traceability of the assets, the cash flow, the investors, for example, and could make the instrument more suitable for green and social financing because of the traceability. I mean, you would know at any point in time where the money went, what assets are you financing, and it could make the industry more compliant because by having the possibility of tracking the underlying assets on a real-time basis, the tangibility ratio would be respected all the time, for example, or at least when the tangibility ratio would drop below the threshold, then you can implement prompt corrective action in this case. But beyond blockchain, I think the real disruption could come from the digital sukuk. And the digital sukuk can help because it allows for smaller transactions at a lower cost. And here, I think sukuk can be accessible to issuers and also investors that would have been otherwise excluded from the market because of the costs or because of the minimum ticket to enter or because of the minimum size of the issuance for the issuers. Issuing sukuk on a platform, you would have standard legal documentation on the platform of issuance. All the back office operation can be streamlined. And the bottom line is that the process of issuance will transform from a cumbersome process with many stakeholders involved to a smooth journey with a few stakeholders involved. And obviously here, there are some prerequisites that needs to be fulfilled before we can reach that point, including the legal environment and also the readiness of the technology, because apparently the technology is not yet ready. Now, in summary, 10 to 12% growth of the industries. There are tremendous opportunities related to the standardization, the increasing of sustainable finance contribution, and finally, the most important message or the most important point is that the coordination between the different stakeholders is really the key factor of success. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, moderators.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day to distinguished guests and honorable participants. Alhamdulillah, we are gathered here today virtually for the Islamic Capital Market Summit ICMS 2021 virtual event. This year's theme is about transformation, resilient, sustainability. We at Apin Islamic, being one of the Islamic bank in Malaysia, are all geared up to actively play our part to accelerate Islamic capital market development of Islamic banking and finance in order to meet the changing needs of customers, businesses and investors. This situation is more challenging given the aftermath of the global pandemic that have affected us, all of us, including how we operate and manage as an Islamic financial institution. My colleagues and I look forward to participate in all the insightful topics during ICMS 2021, inshallah, and I am confident it will bring benefit for all of us. Congratulations to the organizer, Center for Research and Training, CERT, and sponsors for your effort in materializing this year's ICMS. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Mohamad Damak for the special presentations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the next special presentations, let's have another round of spin the wheels of names. Right, can we have the wheels? Megatsha, can you please come forward, introduce yourself? Calling once. Yes? All right. Congratulations to Megatsha for winning a copy of Sharia Minds and ICMS t-shirt. All right, so let's proceed to the next special presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome on our virtual stage, Mr. Houssam Chahin, Chief of UNHCR'S Private Sector Partnership in MENA. Mr. Houssam, tafaddalu.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'll just take a minute to share my screen. Here you go. I trust that all technical issues are good and you can hear me very well. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today I'm trying to, I have few slides, not too many slides this morning. Where I am, I'm currently based in the UAE in Dubai, so it's around 8:20 in the morning. And I'm very happy to be here with you in the Islamic Capital Market Summit 2021. I wish I could be in with you in person, hopefully, inshallah, next year. Today, I'm going to try to talk a little bit, shed some light on the needs of displacements and why it is important to link this to our subject today. So currently we have actually, as we speak, actually it's more than 82.4 million displaced people. We're talking about 84 million displaced people. They are 26.5 of them from they are refugees who had to flee their countries because of conflict, persecution, violence, human rights violations, and different reasons. And we're talking about 20.7, more than 20.7 now million refugees under UNHCR, the organization that I represent this morning. And again, this is a record number, and it's growing, unfortunately, year after year. We're talking today about 5.7 million Palestinian refugees under our sister agency UNRWA mandate, who has been as well displaced for years and years and years. At the same time, 4.1 million asylum seekers worldwide and around 4 million Venezuelans displaced abroad. And this is, again, unfortunately, we see year after year a growth of displacement. Recently, not only because of conflict, but as well because of economic situations and problems all around the world, not only in Africa, not only in the MENA region, that, as you may know, Africa has been always a place where families had to flee and ask for asylum or try to go to another country or another village or another city. But at the same time, now we're talking about situations worldwide, including in Latin and Central Americas. We're talking about more than 60% of displaced people coming from the countries who are part of the Organization of Islamic Coordination and OIC. And this is a very big number or very big percentage as well when it comes to displaced people from the Islamic world, unfortunately. If we talk about, if we go to the situations where I would like to highlight this morning, we're talking about Yemen. And unfortunately, after 6 years of war, Yemen remained the world's most and worst humanitarian crisis. Around 80% of its 31 million population need humanitarian assistance, including 5 million on the brink of famine and under 4 million internally displaced people, the huge number within the country. And at the same time, Yemen hosts around 223,000 refugees, mostly from Somalia. And all of you know the situation in Yemen. Syria continues to be a very big challenge. More than a quarter of all people displaced were from Syria, 27%. And at the same time, sorry, I have to, something happened with the, yeah. So at the same time, we're talking about Afghanistan, which is, as you know, mounting insecurity in Afghanistan during the first half of 2021 forced many Afghanis to flee. More than 2.6 million Afghan refugees were living in 97 countries in mid-year, making Afghanistan the third largest country of origin for refugees. The number is expected to increase, unfortunately, and especially with the current instability that is in the country. Bangladesh, around 1.1 million Rohingya refugees globally, and more than 900,000 currently are in Bangladesh. So the situation is very dire. As I said, the 60% of those refugees globally are in the OIC countries, and UNHCR has been working on the refugee situations for more than 70 years. Just maybe one point on Syria as well. And unfortunately, I mean, it's not anymore very highlighted in the media, the Syria situation, but the situation is very far from being solved when it comes to the humanitarian displacement and humanitarian needs. I'll move to the next slide. And the introduction I gave is really about telling you that UNHCR was one of the first organizations who tried to work with partners. And we've been building up this program, which is the Islamic Philanthropy Program for years now. And we have very solid partnerships that are helping us to navigate the way and try to deliver zakat to beneficiaries who are eligible for zakat, but not only zakat. We're talking about sadaqah, waqf, and other vehicles of Islamic giving or even regular giving from this part of the world. In 2019, we launched the Refugee Zakat Fund. After years of work and consultation and guidance from our partners, who are the experts in the field, now we can say that we have a trusted, compliant, and effective fund that is aiming to partner with institutions and individuals in all around the world and try to deliver zakat to the beneficiaries and who are eligible to receive the contributions from Muzakkin and any person who would like to give to displaced people. The impact in 2020, just very briefly, we had around 2.1 million beneficiaries. And when it comes to the level of fund that we distributed is around 61.5 million. And we managed to work with colleagues in UNHCR in the field. As you may know, UNHCR as a refugee agency, more than 90% of our staff are really on the ground working in many countries where the conflicts are, or in countries where refugees are being hosted. And as you know, most of the hosting communities and countries are usually in dire situations as well, in many cases. Maybe I'm talking here about the Middle East and North Africa region and Africa regions mostly. So we managed to work from the ground up, and we managed to, as UNHCR, through the years, to have 13 situations or countries or fields where refugees and displaced people are, and make sure that these situations are compliant with the Sharia law and with the zakat regulations. So we make sure that this money, once we have a partnership and the partner would like to deliver this zakat, we make sure that this money is going directly to beneficiaries in one of these situations, and we're trying to add day after day, and we make sure that 100% of the funds is going to eligible beneficiaries. One of the main programs we deal with is really cash assistance, and the reason why we focus on cash to distribute cash to families who are in need is because this is the way to support mainly families who are headed usually by women, where men had to stay back at home when the rest of the family left, or other dramatic situations. But at the same time, we trust that refugees know their best interest, and they know where the money should be spent, and especially women who are heading the households. And we trust as well that if we only distribute tools that they might need them for winter or for shelter only, they might not. We don't 100% know that they need this kind of tools. While if we distribute cash, we know that we trust that the parents will serve the family and the children of that family with the best interests of the family. If I go to the next slide, and mainly this is our the main subject today. How do we how Islamic philanthropy, including the Refugee Zakat Fund that UNHCR is overlooking and leading on, how philanthropy for SDGs and SDGs are really linked. So there are a few, I'm going to just give a few examples today, and I think there are other agencies and UN agencies specifically, and international NGOs are trying to get into the Islamic philanthropy ecosystem. And this is something we encourage, and we're trying to share our journey with that, which is still to be continued, and we're learning day after day after day. But if we start on the first one, I think, and it's very important to mention the partnership. This is where I started. This is how we started the program. So the SDG number 17, partnerships for the goals, which is the rest of the goals, we built more than 30 diverse partnerships, and we have globally, including in Asia, in the Middle East, and even in the Americas, and we started working as well in Europe around the topic, the very specific topic of Islamic philanthropy. And some key partners, to mention just few that we really appreciate. In Malaysia, for example, ISRA, Toulouse, Nama Foundation, and Maybank, just on the top of my head, and mainly key partners in Singapore, like Crescent Rating, the Arab Network of Singapore. And in Indonesia, Basnas, Rumah Zakat, Human Initiative, Duafa, and sorry for the pronunciation, Bank Sharia Indonesia, BSI. So this is where I think all starts, because the Zakat Refugee Fund main goal is really to build these partnerships and make sure that through UNHCR we deliver the fund going to people who are in need. If we go back to the cash assistant or cash-based intervention or assistant to refugees, we believe that this will positively contribute to end poverty, as at least among the population of displaced people. So in Lebanon, for example, household expenditures of IDPs and refugees increased to level above the survival minimum expenditure basket, which is a threshold, after 9 months of receiving multi-purpose cash assistance, effectively raising them out of the extreme poverty. Unfortunately, we're talking about the extreme poverty here and not really about wealth or making sure we go above that. But the needs, as you know, are huge, with a huge numbers of refugees with a lot of troubled even host communities around the world. The SDG 2, which is zero hunger, we believe that Islamic philanthropy, including the Refugee Zakat Fund, will help in achieving this goal. First expense for most families receiving cash assistance. As I said, this is our main program in Yemen and Jordan, is food. So mainly people spend the cash assistance on food, specifically in Yemen and Jordan as an example. The SDG number 4, quality education, again, going back to Lebanon as an example, the number of children regularly attending school increased with cash-based assistance. For 10 families assistant, we have 7 more children can attend school, which is a good number, again, starting from a very low threshold. But we hope that this will increase, especially now we're looking as well on higher education under the campaign Aiming Higher. SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. Among Syrian refugees families in Iraq, for example, the proportion of school-aged children working for for pay decreased from 15% to 8% after 8 months of receiving cash assistance. Again, another development that we believe if we focus more and more on mobilizing these kind of funds through partners, this will only hopefully get more results and helping more people and children and families. Just another point on the SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Each dollar of cash assistance given to Syrian refugees in Lebanon generates $2.13 of GDP for the Lebanese economy without increasing inflation. Of course, as you know, all the situation currently in Lebanon is very, very challenging, and getting even a humanitarian fund to the country can help as well in contributing to the GDP of the country in these very troubled times. When we talk about goods, currently we're talking about liquefied petroleum gas, and we're trying to focus on this part of the goods through Islamic Philanthropy and the Refugee Zakat Fund for several reasons, not only to make sure that the families are they have a more sustainable source of to cook and to provide food needs for their families, but as well to help the host communities in Bangladesh, for example, to make sure that we sustain the environment and we decrease the cutting of the trees for cooking purposes, and this is very crucial as well. So just a couple of examples before maybe I finish this presentation. On the SDG 3, for example, as you can see on the screen, which is good health and well-being, the use firewood and mud ovens creates high volume of smoke in a densely populated areas, negatively impacting the health of the refugee population. That's another reason in relation to health. And of course, this is related as well to SDG number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. Just a quick example on this. The use of firewood of cooking fuel required cleaning up more than 5 football fields of trees every day. And this is as well related to the environmental issues. So I'll of course, just to shed some light on the importance of sadaqah, and we're working on with partners as UNHCR on a lot of projects that include solar energy provision for refugee needs when it comes to water and electricity, and trying to make sure that serves as well the education programs for children where electricity usually is very challenging to be provided. I just want to thank you again for listening, and I just want to shed light on one event that is happening tomorrow, where we are launching our mid-year report on Islamic philanthropy for 2021 in collaboration with the Muslim World League at the Expo 2020 here in Dubai, but of course it will be also live streamed. So for those of you who would like to be or to watch this event, I'm happy. Please contact me through the chat now. With you all the detail at the same time, the mid-year report for the Islamic Philanthropy Program site, and you can go to zakat.unhcr.org, and you can reach not only this report but the report since 2029. Looking forward to any questions or through the chat or any other platform. And we're looking as well to work with you to serve humanity and to serve our people. And at the same time, hopefully we can contribute together to the SDGs moving forward together. And thank you very much.